Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. A very good morning to all of you. I got introduced to marine science when I was in school, and when I joined the civil services in 1991, I had the opportunity to work at the Education Ministry to develop fisheries science curriculum. And from then on, I got more exposed to marine science, and in 2008, I had the opportunity to start work at Marine Research Center, and that is how I got engaged in tuna and the live bait associated with the tuna fishery. And during that time, I had the opportunity to study at James Cook University, completing my master's, and then, of course, recently I completed my PhD at Montpellier University in France. And during that time, what I'm trying to present today is part of my PhD work. And this work will be published soon in a peer-reviewed international journal. The study focuses on FADs, especially the tuna associated with FADs, because Maldives has a very large array of FADs. I wouldn't call it a network because we see very little link between the FADs. The first FADs were introduced into the Maldives in 1981, and since then the FAD as a tuna aggregating device has helped the fishery very much. So we have at present 55 anchored FADs deployed across the Maldives, spreading over a very large area from 7 degrees north to 1 degree south. Many countries across the Indian Ocean and throughout the world use FADs for fishing, especially anchored FADs. But all of them are not monitored very well or not managed very well. But unlike that, there are FAD fisheries that are managed well. And Maldives is a very good example of that. In the Indian Ocean, there are countries that use FADs like Mauritius, and in the Pacific, Hawaii uses FADs. And when we compare the distance between the closest neighboring FADs in these countries with our FAD array, we find that we have a very large distance between the closest neighboring FADs. So the FADs in the Maldives are very sparsely distributed, sitting in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And this makes the FAD array in the Maldives a very unique array in the world as well. So the objective of this study is to look at especially the behavior of tuna in an array of FAD that are sparsely distributed, and how this type of FAD array could benefit the FAD fishery in the Maldives, and how this may become an example to others using FAD across the world. So first we try to look at the various studies that were conducted related to FAD in the country, in the Maldives. We found there were some conventional tagging papers published, and only one acoustic tagging paper that was published related to behavior of tuna around FADs, and this was conducted in 2010, published in 2013, and only 8 FADs were used during that time. So to select a suitable site, we used this knowledge, and then we decided to this time do it on a huge scale, spreading from 2 degrees north to 1 degree south, covering a huge area in the south of the Maldives, which contains 21 pads. So this was like a huge undertaking, but we wanted to properly study the behavior of tuna around a sparsely spread out anchored fish aggregating array in the Maldives. And we selected this site because there is plenty of tuna fishing taking place here as well. So similar to the previous study, we equipped all the pads with listening stations, so VR2 receivers. And then we also deployed echosounders. The VR2 were sitting about 12 to 15 meters beneath the surface of the water, attached to the pad anchor rope. Why we did that at depth? That is because we don't want to lose any VR2s, because sometimes, you know, the curious fishermen, they tend to take them and see what it is. Similarly, we decided to deploy echosounders on the surface, and again, to prevent vandalism, we attached these with stainless steel rope, stainless steel wire and rope as well. So once the pads were equipped, we decided to tag at 4 pads, 2 on the east side of the array and 2 towards the west side of the array. And tagging was done on a pole and line vessel. We catch the fish and gently land it on the tagging table, made a small insertion on the belly of the fish, put inside a small transmitter, acoustic transmitter that emits a continuous signal every 10 seconds. Then the belly is closed by putting 2 stickers, and the fish is placed back in the water. Once the fish is in the water, as long as it is within 800 meters of the VR2 that is in the water, it keeps recording the signal. So once it leaves the pad and arrives at another pad, and the VR2 will record its presence. So we started the experiment, and it was, of course, very challenging because we were doing it in the open ocean, and studying tuna in the open ocean is always a challenge. Stormy weather conditions, strong currents, finding suitable divers who are actually bold enough to dive at this and deploy the equipment was a big challenge. And on top of this, there were these curious sharks, oceanics, trying to see what the divers were doing. And in addition to that, the biggest problem was, after all this, we had a lot of vandalism. We lost 38 echosounders. Some were cut and released into the sea. Others, the fishermen or whoever who came to the pad, took it to their home. And we were able to track them and collect it from their homes. They were quite surprised. So this is what happened to the ones that were drifting in the water. Some of them were picked up by Sri Lankan fishermen, and they ended up in Sri Lanka. Others, they drift all the way to Indonesia, Andaman, and they were drifting in the water. Okay, findings from this experiment we were doing. We were able to keep the devices in the water for 45 weeks. And to quickly summarize findings, we saw that only very few tuna actually moved between the pads. We tagged at 4 pads, but from only 1 pad, we saw 1 skipjack and 3 yellowfin moved to other pads of all the fish that we tagged. No fish from any other pad moved to another pad. And there was no particular direction they chose to move. So there was no directionality and all these fish left together. So this was a finding that was not similar to what we were seeing from other studies in other parts of the world. And then, of course, when we look at the residence time, total residence time, the time the fish spend in this array of pads, we found in the Maldives it's quite low number of days they spend within this array of pads. But in other countries like Hawaii, Mauritius, the fish keep bouncing from one pad to the other and spend a lot of time within the fed array, making the fish accessible for the fishermen to catch. Findings from the echosounders. We saw that the echosounders were displaying biomass abundance. And we did not see that the fish tend to live together, or we did not see the pads becoming devoid of fish suddenly. So there is always some amount of fish biomass at the pad as large portion of the fish school leave. And another interesting thing we found was that some of these pads actually attract more fish throughout the year. So something around that pad encourages fish to stay around that pad. Maybe it is a more 5-star pad. So throughout the year, we see this pattern, and there are no two adjacent pads that attract similar amounts of fish. And there was no particular seasonal pattern of aggregation either. But in the studies in the past, and the fishermen has been reporting that on the east side of the Maldives, the fish aggregate during the northeast monsoon, and on the south, they aggregate during the southwest monsoon. But in this region where we studied, we did not see this pattern. So at present, pads in the Maldives do not seem to act as a network. And there is no evidence that there is a local tuna population in the Maldives, because once the fish leave, they hardly come back to the pad array, or they hardly visit the pads, and we did not pick any signals again. So maybe they just stay in the Maldives briefly and they continue on their journey. But since there's plenty of tuna around these pads, we know the tuna turnover in the Maldives is very high. And others who have conducted modeling activities using the data that we gather from the field have shown that by increasing the number of pads and by shortening the inter-AFAD distances, we could actually make the tuna stay longer closer to the Maldives. So this is something that we need to study further. So one interesting study that we could do is to deploy a group of pads around one of the existing pads and see how fish aggregate around it, and maybe why some pads attract more fish, and combining echosounder data with local ecological knowledge of the fishes and interpret what we see from, or what we observe through equipment from a fisher perspective. And maybe in the future we could deploy echosounders on every pad and see what is happening around each pad by pressing a button in the office or at home. So the fishermen know, today Dandu pad has more fish, I will go there. Today Tinadu pad has more fish, so I don't have to go to other pads, I can just go there. So maybe this could be possible. So the important information that we were able to extract from this study is that the present AFAD array in the Maldives, anchored FAD array in the Maldives, have very little impact on the behavior of tuna. So this is a good model maybe that other countries could practice. From an ecological perspective, it has less impact on the tuna itself. But from a socio-economic perspective, if we increase the number of FADs in the Maldives, we can retain the fish longer closer to our atolls and make them more accessible for the fishermen. That will reduce the cost of operation, make the fishermen happy because they can come back home early to spend time with their family. But that will increase the vulnerability of the fish stock. I will stop there. Yeah? Thank you very much.